So good morning. Formal good morning. Okay, we're going to be learning Hemshech Ayin Beis, the famous Hemshech Ayin Beis, which most people are afraid to touch. First of all, because it's almost like a Mayim Shein Lehem Sof. The Hemshech goes for over 1,400 pages, and even that, the Rebbe Rashab never finished it in writing. I don't know how much background you know about it, but I think it's kedai to just give a little background about the Hemshech, and also explain why I think I wanted to learn this, even though all my modim are choshev and everything is valuable, everything is part of the all of Chassidus. But I'll share why I wanted to learn with this Ayin Beis. The Hemshech was always known, even though we didn't have it. We only had just the first, the first 17 Maimorim. Remember, there's 144 Maimorim. And that's without the part, which I'll explain in a moment, that was not delivered. So we had the first 17 Maimorim in Kupir. You know, Kupir is the way it was. Chassidim learned it. It wasn't published yet officially. It was published like typed letters. You may have seen Svarim. The Rebbe was the one that really started publishing them. Until Tavshin Lamed Zayin, Yutas Kislev. The same Farbrengen I mentioned, where the Rebbe spoke about Mashpim. There was a big surprise at that Farbrengen, where the Rebbe said, right after the same sikh about Mashpim, he said, I always was bothered. I'm chazing push the sikh from the Rebbe. That the Rebbe said, I was always bothered by something for many years. And obviously everybody was extremely intrigued to know what the Rebbe was going to say. And the Rebbe said that when the Frierdiker Rebbe was traveling, he had to leave Russia, and then Europe was a whole upheavals. So when he was traveling, he gave me copies. He gave me the original manuscripts of the Rebbe Rashab, his father's writings. Remember that Rabbi, in most cases, didn't just deliver the Maimorim, but they also wrote them. The interesting uniqueness is only the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe. The Rebbe specifically is almost everything b'dibur. The Rebbe didn't write much. He didn't write sichos, he didn't write Maimorim. Letters the Rebbe wrote, and answers, reshimas. But most of the Rebbe is completely Baal Peh, and Manichim wrote it. The Alter Rebbe, except Tanya, the Alter Rebbe didn't write. Look at the Teira, all the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe delivered, Manichim wrote. Rebbe Rashab, on the other hand, same thing with the Mittler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Rashab, the Frierdiker Rebbe, delivered Maimorim and wrote. Actually, they wrote more than they delivered even. So there's a massive amount of manuscripts in the Rebbe's library of Agudas Chabad. So the Rebbe said, the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him manuscripts of the Rebbe Rashab. He says, among the manuscripts was Hemshech Ayin Beis, Hayudua. So the Rebbe said that immediately, he didn't know how long it's going to remain by him, but he right away went and made copies of everything. And the Rebbe even brought from Halach, he said, L'cheira is Ashayla, because in Halach it says, if someone gives you to watch, to be ashamed over manuscripts or Sfarim, you're not supposed to look into them. You're not supposed to have anah from them. You're just ashamed. Except there's one condition in halacha. If the person who's ashamed is a Talmud Chacham, so the person who gave it to him, therefore knows that he's going to look into it. So you're not in any way, there's no Gneivas Das, etc. The Rebbe said, I'm not going to say that I am that, but one thing I could say that the Shver for sure knew, the Frierdiker Rebbe knew that if he gave me something, I'm definitely going to one point learn it and be mefarsim it. So b'meil, it wasn't a problem to do that. He made the copies. So the Rebbe said, was when what will happen, and the Poel Mamish, he gave back the manuscripts to the Frierdiker Rebbe, I believe, but the copies remained by the Rebbe. So the Rebbe said, these copies of Ayin Beis have remained with me till this day. What's the dilemma? Chassidus was meant to spread it, to publish and to learn it and so on. But here's a problem. Here, the Hemshech Ayin Beis, and this is the mysterious part that till this day we don't really understand. The Rebbe said, but the Hemshech Ayin Beis, Mesiba Sheines, for different reasons, connected to Sakona. Those are the Rebbe's words. Connected to Sakona. I actually even have a copy of the Sikh here if anybody wants to copy it. Connected to Sakona, it wasn't published. So on one hand, I had it. No, not in the new one. It's in the older edition. Mine, I just have a copy in the front. Also. I could show it to you afterwards. So on one hand, I had it. On the other hand, I didn't want to take the achrayus to publish it. Now, why Ayin Beis and not other Hemshechim and other Maimorim, everything else that Rebbe did publish? So the Rebbe said, this has been bothering me all these years. So I came up with Hamtzah. This is what we're going to do, the Rebbe said. I'm going to throw it to Chassidim, the manuscripts, meaning it'll be published as a shutfus of all of us. Everyone will give $1, not more, not less. It's not for the money. It's just that everybody takes achrayus together. There'll be no name. It will not be signed like a regular Pesach Dover. In all the Maimorim, you'll see a sign. Look at this Hagdama, and you'll see it just said B'teidev v'shvach l'Hashem Yisborach, and there's no signature. Look at any other sefer, you'll see there's a chasima. In earlier years, the Rebbe wrote his name. Here, there's no names. The Rebbe says, "I'll throw it into Chassidim, and that way it'll be published, and it's on everybody's achrayus." And you'll see, this is only sefer, only Hamshech Ayin Beis. So of course, what kind of rash it made. I remember I was 20 years old then. It was such a gilui, and we were wondering. I remember I went to Rabbi Groner. I went to ask, what was this sakana? Everyone said, till now we thought there was just not enough money to publish it. And one of the suddas, the Rebbe said that if someone has money, I think Rabbi Simpson and other chassidim asked the Rebbe, why don't they publish Ayin Beis? He said, if there's money, but that's what everybody thought. But here was sakana. Just to this is already what chassidim said. A year later, less than a year later, was the heart attack. The second time Ayin Beis was printed was Tafshin Beis. A few months later was the stroke. So people said that maybe that's connected, maybe not. Now, I'm not going to go, I want to learn it inside, and obviously, but I think it's good to understand what we're learning here. So no, Chaz v'Shalom, it's not a sakana to learn Ayin Beis. First of all, the way we learn it, I wouldn't be worried. And I guess if there was that, if you really know how to learn. Secondly, the Rebbe still did it. He didn't, remember the Alter Rebbe also, Pella, Yutas Kislev is coming. Alter Rebbe sat in prison, not just Masada Mesira, because Lamaila was a Kitrig. What's the Kitrig? Lamaila Kitrig, if there's Chaz v'Shalom, Machlekas by Jews, or the people are not doing the Eibush Tavil. Kumta Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, is Megala Teir. For this is a Kitrig Lamaila. You ever think about the Klotzkash? A Kitrig Lamaila to be Megala Teir isn't why the Eibush wants us to do is learn Teir and teach Teir. Never then, there's such a Keneged that the Gilead of Chassidus was so powerful that the such a Keneged, put up a big resistance. And that was the Kitrig. Since Gilead Chassidus is a Chonah to Mashiach and has the power to change the world, so of course, the Ummah will come and do everything possible to stop it. So you have to say that Ayin Beis is somewhat connected to that. That's my understanding of Sakana. Other Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab, Samach Vov is not, and other Maimorim of all the Rabbeim, but seemingly Ayin Beis has something about it that is much more powerful and has that element of the ability to. That's how we always touched it. That this Ayin Beis was like the last shlav of Gilead Chassidus that till then was kept secret. Now the Rebbe had the Hemshech, and the Rebbe said Maimorim. There's Maimorim in Tafshin Yud Aleph and Yud Beis and Yud Gimel. That's mamish almost word for word from Ayin Beis. We didn't know it at the time because we didn't have Ayin Beis to compare it to. But if you see how, when you look now, when you look at Ayin Beis, it's the half of a fellow, the Rebbe Chazed Kamat Os Ba'os, and the Chazin, Mabel, and the Chazin repeated Os Ba'os, and it's almost like a copy of Ayin Beis with Isofis and so on. So this is the background a little of Ayin Beis, how the Rebbe was Megala to us. I will just say one more thing. The Rebbe Natsich has said something which maybe also carries some of the power. He said that the neflois of Ayin Beis is neflois afil l'gabe the neflois of Samach Vov. The Rebbe's words, which means Samach Vov was always known to be the most Yiseides the Hemshech and Chassidus, and it was always Samach Vov was always available from Tofres Samach Vov. Ayin Beis was not. The Rebbe Rashab said it, but then what he wrote, as I said, remained only by the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe. No one else had it. There were some hanochas, but not in the full picture of it. So that's the ace. That's what we're learning. The floys, I feel the gabbat in the floys of Samach Vov. One more thing I want to share, and I'm not sharing it just time to tell the story about Ayin Beis, but also it sets the stage So what's in the Sefer here that is in this Hemshech that's so unique that Chassidus and other Chassidus doesn't have? So it's good also to point out like this. The Hemshech was delivered, as you know, was the Rebbe Rashab both said it and wrote it. He wrote it first and then said it. We don't know exactly how much earlier, but he definitely wrote it months before he began to deliver it. The delivery of Ayin Beis began on Shavuos Tov Reish Ayin Beis. That's why it's called B'Shah Shekdimu Terav. And the equivalent is 1912. So we're talking about exactly 108 years ago, a little more than 108 years ago. Right. Now, we know that he began writing it earlier because Frierdiker Rebbe writes in his Shimis and diary that the winters those years, the Rebbe Rashab, the doctor's orders were, because he was sickly, that in the winter, Lubavitch was very, very cold. Then the winters, the Rebbe Rashab, they told him to go to a warm place near water. Chanech Lanari writes, the Rebbe Rashab writes that the doctors told him to do that, or the Frierdiker Rebbe writes it. So he would go mostly to the south of France. It's always warm and there's water there. The city, many people may know, Menton, was a town. I actually visited it last year because I was in Monaco. So it's just a 20-minute drive. So the Shliach took me there. In Menton, it's the south of France. It's on the water, on the Mediterranean. Yamagadol, Yamatichin. And that's where he would go for the winters. So the famous story that you may know, you've heard the Rebbe Chazed it when he told the Sikh, when he said the Sikha of Kom l'Rabbi v'shochta l'Rab Zeda and Tovshin Mem Dalet. Famous Sikha. So the Rebbe gave a dugma, what v'shochta? How could the Rabbi went and shecht Rab Zeda? No, the was the klotz kasha. But he killed him, he murdered him. I'm putting now the whole thing. So the Rebbe gave an example that the Rebbe explained. The kids said the Rebbe explained that it wasn't shchita. Shchita is ein v'shachat elo moshach. Shchita is more of an aliyah. That he caused him to have klei sanefesh because he was megala primis atera. Rabbi is meloshen rav. Abzeda meloshen zeira small. So he didn't have the kalim for it. So he had klei sanefesh. The klei sanefesh is misik pshute, but it's not with a knife. It was he caused him to have klei sanefesh. So the Rebbe gave two dugmoyes then in that farbrengen for klei sanefesh. In our time, one was the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe said that it was in Menton, I believe. He says yes, Menton, and the Frierdiker Rebbe was with him. Frierdiker Rebbe writes that he sees the Rebbe Rashab standing in the hotel room, in the room where they were staying. I don't know if it was a hotel room. I don't know if it was a hotel. I think in the room they were staying. Actually, I went to the house where we know where the Rebbe Rashab would rent. There's still you still see the carving of where mezuzah was once. And the Rebbe Rashab was standing, and he was being mizbeinen. So the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't disturb, obviously. He came back 10 minutes later, the same time of the matzav. Came back an hour later, 2 hours later, I think 7 or 8 hours. The Rebbe Rashab did not lezaz, did not make any move. He was completely absorbed. Frierdiker Rebbe, of course, didn't want to say anything. But then finally, after those hours, Frierdiker Rebbe saw that Rebbe Rashab was like coming out of it, so to speak, whatever trance he was in. Matzav he was in, I don't know if I use the word trance, whatever word is the right word to use. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is the way the Rebbe said it. I remember the Rebbe said, the Rebbe de Schwer hat gesehen, the Tata hat angegeben fragen Scheiles, von der Scheiles hat verstanden, als weiß nicht, in welches Zman und Mokem ist. Frierdiker Rebbe realized from the question the Rebbe Rashab was asking that the Rebbe Rashab was like, did not recognize the time and place he was in. In other words, he was in a different place. So the Frierdiker Rebbe in a Bakovidik way answered the questions until so-called the Rebbe Rashab reconnected to Elam Haz. That was the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said that was a dugma for Shochtel Rab Zeda, the idea of going a race from Kalim, a race from Zman and Mokim. The Rebbe gave another dugma, which is not in the Gay here, to the Mojus Rebbe when he sang a nigun, he was able to deal with the pain of an operation. But I don't want to go there. That's a derech hagav. The Rebbe then said, "V'yesh emrim," that he was being mizbeinen then on Hemshech Ayin Beis. Now, for a person, a human being, to think for 30 seconds without distraction, we know is not so easy. Try it out. This is 8 hours, and not a Pella, of course, not a Rebbe, but the Rebbe Rashab, but it's Ayin Beis. So it adds a whole dimension that Ayin Beis was clearly by the Rebbe Rashab a major Hemshech, to the point that he was mizbeinen on the whole thing. I want to just read to you. I don't know if it's in the back of this volume here. Let me see.
Put it in the back of all three of the.
Oh, it's the back, yeah. Okay, I am still from the old timers. I have the first edition. Well, it's not actually the first edition, it's the second edition. But there's a zettel where the Rebbe Rashab writes like this. He writes, he says like this. It's a letter that Rebbe Rashab writes to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Tezvov Tevis Ayin Dalet. So that'll be 2 years later. In the Be'esha Hoseh, while he remained in the winter months in Menton, he says, Le'esata, ani osuk b'milui hemshach hadrush b'shah shegdimu, asher ma'oz nusanu mebeisenu, gam b'vin, gam b'pa, ani osuk b'zeh, u'b'kerev hayom yugmir mitzvah Hashem. So he makes reference to the writing of this hemshach. So he began writing the hemshach somewhere, most likely based on this, between January, or let's say Shvat, which would be winter of Ayin Beis, and Shavuos. So those months is probably when the Rebbe Rashab began to write it. We don't know exactly when. But what's fascinating, which I'd like to tell you, is this. When you look at the Ksav Yad of the Ayin Beis, and I studied it many times, we have the whole manuscript. Today we have both the copies and the original, because the Frierdiker Rebbe library had the original, the Rebbe had the copies. But it's copies of that. Something that Lahaf Mamish, you're rarely going to see something like this. Rebbe Rashab, just to show you, here's the first page of the Ksav Yad. Okay, I'll show it on. I'll put it here too. Okay, so I have it on record. This is the first page. This is exact size. It's not reduced. So he wrote with ink and quill, because you can't write like that with a pen. It's mamish azebid, so it's very tiny. And if you'll not notice any cross-outs. There's no crossing out. I mean, you have one here, but it's never, I don't know if any of you have ever written. I'm a writer, so I can tell you. And the writers, there's no such thing as someone writing pages upon pages without one cross-out. Many times you cross out, you could write a second version, like a Madura Basra. This was writing, even the Alter Rebbe. You can see what we have the Ksav Yad, he crosses out, because it's a natural thing. As you write it, then you go back and you fix a word. This would mean that the Rebbe Rashab, either his brain was directly connected to his hand, and it was like a flow that he did not have to go back to change anything, or he thought it all through beforehand, before he wrote, which is, both of them would be something very rare. But you look, pages upon pages. So he wrote the Hemshech, and he wrote it. Huh?
He didn't write it and rewrite it?
No. He wrote it in one flow, hundreds of pages. We see it, you can see it. There's no other document.
Maybe he was saying maybe put it in Shemesh, so it doesn't matter.
And the Frierdiker Rebbe makes no mention, and it doesn't look like it. I don't think that's the case. There's nothing that the Rabbeim left that was thrown into Shemesh. Everything they had, we have. If they sometimes wrote, the Alter Rebbe wrote a Tanya, Madura Kama, and then he added Madura Bas. Everything is preserved. So just to tell you how it was written, so it was written one long flow, okay? And then when the Rebbe Rashab is ready to start delivering it, speaking it, saying it on a Shabbat, like in the first case Shavuos, then he added beginnings and ends. So the Maimonim actually are made up of two different stages. The first stage is just a flow of ideas that go for pages and pages and pages. If you read it, there's no Dibra Maskal, there's no Sof, it just flows. Some of all, by the way, is also the same thing. Most Hamshechim are this way. Before he delivered it, could be a week before, could be a month before, he added a beginning and an end. And then that's why you have Yesh La'agdim Hashem Izbar L'il in all Hamshechim. Because that's what he wrote when he added the beginnings. He said, let's say in this case, B'shar Shigdimu actually began exactly B'shar Shigdimu. But just turn to page, for example, Yud Aleph, Eiter Kesalma. So that first paragraph, Eiter, was written later. Before it was said. Then on that, that's the second night of Shavuos. Then he said it. He wrote it before Shavuos. Then he delivered it. Okay, and he wrote a separate book. So there's one kuntres that's just the pnim of the Maimorim, like v'hadugma mikol ze yuvin. Then the beginnings and ends, like go to page Yutes. Actually, in this case, no, because page Yutes. See, V'zeu ma shekosav eiter kol salma was in the second version. In other words, now he wrote where it says on page this and this, bli gvul chulu, add V'zeu ma shekosav eiter. And then he did it each mimer by mimer. So now you have two kontresim. One is the pnim of the Maimorim, the other is the beginnings and ends. It's not over. He then gave it to a maitik. It was called a maitik, was somebody who's copied it. And he told them to combine them now. Turn them into the Rebbe Rashab. It was all directed by the Rebbe Rashab. He gave it to a maitik. If you look in the back of the Kisriya, you have all the versions there. He gave it to a maitik who combined both of them together. He took the Dibra Maskal and the end and added those pieces. So now you have a structure of memory. He gave it back to the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab edited and added pieces. It's not over yet. Then comes the next stage. At some point, again, we don't know exactly when, the Rebbe Rashab now gave it again to our mites. You had now the version of Maimorim, and then went and added Kitsurim for each and chapters. The Maimorim didn't have chapters. They were just one long Maimer, like in Samach Vov. He added chapters, Perek Aleph, Perek Beis, Perek Gimel, and so on. And after each chapter, he added a Kitzur. So it's a third Kuntras, which is called Kitzurim and Prokim Kitzurim. And then he gave it, and then he edited it again. So we're talking here an investment of at least 4 or 5 stages. No other Hemshech, no other Maimorim have that many stages of editing by the Rebbe himself. At the end,
but he didn't finish the Kitzurim.
Once he made the Kitzurim and the Prokim, then obviously the next step would be put it all together, and then you have the final what we have now. I don't know if he gave a mighty the Kitzurim and the Prokim.
He doesn't finish it. That's the middle of the phase.
So he didn't continue. That's good. But
Did you have the Kitzurim before it was published? Like the first part of the
we had nothing. No, we only had the first 17 Maimorim.
So it didn't have Kitzurim?
I think in the Kupir, I don't think so. I don't think there's Kitzurim or Prokim. I think it's only Maimorim. It's only like the first version. Okay, now this continued on till Shabbos Parsha Vayera Tofresh Ayin Vov. That was the last Shabbos that the Rebbe Rashab was in Lubavitch. Due to World War I, it was then he moved after 101 years of Lubavitch being 102 years of Lubavitch being in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Rashab moved to Rostov. So this would be the equivalent of 1915. That was the last Maimer he would deliver on Ayin Beis. After that, he continued writing. So we have what's called Chelik Shlei Nemar, the third volume. Now it's not the third volume, the new edition, but it's the third volume. That's only the first version. Only a flow without Maimorim, and obviously no Kitzurim and no Prokim. Just one long Hemshech. That first version remains. And that too is not finished completely because there's some questions that he asks and you see he didn't answer. Now, as far as you mentioned, the Prokim and the Kitzurim stop in Pashas Truma Tofresh Ayin Hey. Obviously, that's he didn't continue, didn't have the time, or whatever the reason was. That's where it stops. So after Truma Ayin Hey, it just goes to Maimorim without Kitzurim and Prokim, and then comes a section after Vayera Ayin Vov. The Lei Nemar means he never delivered it. It's only written, and it's one long flow. That's some of the structure of Ayin Beis. What I think I want to emphasize most is you could see the chvivus that by the Rebbe Rashab what Ayin Beis was. It was clearly what they call in English the magnum opus. You heard the expression that the Frierdiker Rebbe brings, the name of the Rashbats, that the Rambam that the Rebbe Rashab was the Rambam of Chassidus, and everybody wonders what does that mean exactly. And where do you see Rambam in the Rebbe Rashab? You see Amkus. And I would suggest that probably Ayin Beis is where you see the most Rambam, because what he does in Ayin Beis, which is exactly why I felt it's the best thing to learn now, is exactly that. What does the Rambam do? So Rambam takes all of Shas and all of the Rishenim and before that, and all the Ge'enim and Rabbanu Savaroi and Ge'enim and Rishenim before him. That's what he writes in Zagdome and makes it Mesudar in Hilchas and Halachas, Hilchas Yisei Teira, Hilchas etc., Hilchas Shabbos, so on. So the Rebbe Rashab in Ayin Beis does exactly the same thing. Obviously, Chassidus is not halacha, it's not Shulchan Aruch with sifim and all that, but he took all the sugis of Chassidus and that's an Ayin Beis. Every sugi you'll ever learn, or will ever learn, from the Alter Rebbe, all the way to the Rebbe Marash, including the Rebbe Rashav's Maimorim, in Ayin Beis you'll find it. And not just find it, you find it connected with the other sugis. Most people don't know this. So Ayin Beis is not just a long hemshech. Rebbe Rashav didn't just come and connect a bunch of things. He took all of Chassidus and made it into a flow that mamish all connect. There's no sugi in Chassidus that's not connected. So even though you say Rambam Chassidus, all the Maimorim that Rebbe Rashav does it, but in Ayin Beis it's boilet in a very obvious way. So really, from Ayin Beis you can get anywhere. To Tanya, to Imre Bina, to the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek's, wherever you go. I personally, doing research and learning it and so on, marked up in my Ayin Beis, almost all of Imre Bina, whole Sefer of the Mittler Rebbe is in Ayin Beis. Almost all of it. Probably all of it. Not in the same order. So what you see is that Ayin Beis becomes this, like you could say, almost like catch-all of Gans Chassidus. And now, obviously, it takes a long time to learn all these pages. But nevertheless, because I did learn it a few times, I will, the way I'll learn it is, that's why I think it's a good idea you guys learn it on your pace. I'm not, I rely that you learn it the pshat. I'm not going to go necessarily have to learn every line, Pashut, Pshut, Shel, and Yonim, but rather give more of an overview of the Teichana and Yonim and also the connection. So it's more than just learning a page, but really showing how this page connects to the whole sugis and so on. Obviously, I'll learn inside, but I'll do it more, not so much for kamus, but more for echus. And so the more you learn it, the better you learn it, the easier it'll be for me to, like what a good shiur would be. You don't want the Magid shiur to say over what you learned already. You don't need the tight Pirush Hamilas, but to give more emek and a more of a skira, an overview of the whole thing, and really an overview how Ayin Beis explains Chassidus in a complete, like the Rebbe says, neflois, feel the gab the neflois of Samach Vov. So Samach Vov Chassidim called the most Yusedis Dike Hemshech, and Ayin Beis is the most tifs to Hemshech. And it is quite tif. If Chassidus is deep, this is a whole different level. There are places that you have to mamish break your head. The Rebbe Rashab said when he learned that Imre Bina, it's Chesgeris in the Harfen Cup. That's what the Rebbe Rashab said. So I guess if you learn this properly, you may become bald. I don't know, Begashmis, but Kaponim, definitely psychologically. I'm not saying that's a never nabechin of success. I'm just saying that's that's just an interesting note. So with that said, obviously I wanted to just give this overview. It makes it a lot more geschmacker. And let me see, did I cover everything? Yeah, I think I covered what I wanted to say here.
Was there like a stronger focus from the Rebbe to Ayin Beis more than other parts of Chassidus?
When you see now the Maimorim that Rebbe delivered over the years, you see how much of Ayin Beis, probably more than any other Chassidus that Rebbe chazes from Ayin Beis. Maimorim after Maimorim. I mean, Maimorim that we're even familiar with. For example, everybody knows Leitia Mishakela, right? Tafshin Yud Beis. Tafshin, Leitia Mishakela is Meyusad on Vayikra Ayin Hei. Vayikra and Sav Ayin Hei. About Aveda Tzera Geveya. So like one of the most Seder Maimorim of the Rebbe is Geboit on Ayin Beis. And when you see Ayin Beis, you see the Chidushim of the Rebbe there. And I can go on and on. Many Maimorim that you may be familiar with, even Mugadika Maimorim, are based on Ayin Beis. Today we have it, so it's Tzeichent. So what we're looking at, just to give you the Tfusim, so Ayin Beis was printed first in Lamed Zayin. The Rebbe asked the Koil Yungalite to make a Mafteach that year, Lamed Zayin. It was reprinted in, I said, Nun Beis rather. This is, I think, a Nun Beis edition. It was reprinted a few times, and recently what you have is Mar Mekamis were added to the bottom. So you have more Mar Mekamis. The Pnim is the same, but they compare it again. You always find mistakes here and there. So, but here, if you look, you'll see the pages of the volumes further are marked here because so many people of us learned it. Like if you look on page Beis, you see a Beis in the middle of nowhere. That Beis is the original Beis because the pages are different setup because of the Mar Mekamis. So these bold letters tell you where.
Divided the paragraphs, no?
Did they? I think they may have. And there's a big debate about it, to be honest, because some people said not to touch it. They may have added some paragraphs, which the Rebbe Rashab did not add. But like the volume here that I'm looking at is purely exactly how the Rebbe Rashab did it. So it's the Rebbe, there's Prokim and Kitsurim. The debate was because since the Rebbe Rashab himself made Prokim, so who has the right to go and make Prokim, more? But for Teil Salemet, fine, it's a technical matter. Like in Tanya, nobody's going to go reprint a Tanya and make paragraphs out of it. I mean, original Tanya. You'll do it at a Tanya Muvueris or something like that. So I'm going to begin now from the beginning. Here we will learn inside. And my goal really is that this should be not just a one-way street I'm teaching, but to be interactive. I'm going to make it try to be as relevant as possible. And obviously, it's true. I'm not going. This is not a adaptation of Ayin Beis. This is learning Ayin Beis, but still, there's learning and there's learning, and understand the central theme of it. Because here, of course, the big klotzkash is why did the Rebbe Rashab need 1,400 pages to explain one inyan? I mean, he wanted to make different memorim. We have memorim, Sefer memorim, Tafresh Mem Gimel, Mem Daled, Mem Hey, Mem Vov. They're not. You go through, and there are hemshechim, but they're usually short. Why did the Rebbe Rashab need to connect it? And I don't want to repeat what I've heard some people say. They say the Rebbe Rashab was he showing kunsten that he can connect the memorim. Rebbe Rashab has to show off. Chas v'shalom. So the word is that you have to say there's a tzrichus. That the Rebbe Rashab, as he connected the sugyas, he saw each sugya helps understand the previous sugya. And that's the real beauty of Ayin Beis that you'll not find anywhere. In Samach Vov consists of 61 Maimorim. Ayin Beis consists of 144 Maimorim without the part 3, which he only wrote. So it's double Samach Vov, probably triple Samach Vov. So Samach Vov is also a tzrichas. If any of you ever learned Samach Vov from beginning to end, and you know the picture, you know exactly why each piece he wrote. Okay, but it's not so simple in Samach Vov either, because Samach Vov 2, the Rebbe Rashab added later, the last Maimorim. In Ayin Beis, it all comes together. The difference between Samach Vov and Ayin Beis, in that sense, the Samach Vov does not cover all of Chassidus. It covers Yeseides Dikas, Sugis. Ayin Beis covers everything. You'll find, as I said before, you'll find all of Chassidus in Ayin Beis. And that doesn't mean it repeats it. Obviously, it's not a duplicate. If you learn Ayin Beis, you don't have to learn other Maimorim. But Ayin Beis is like almost a B'chlal M'saimon in a way of many of the Sugis. So to begin with a short Hagdama to the Teichnam Hamshach now. I mentioned this last week when I gave the Hagdama to this Shiur, that the real biggest question, of course, is what Chassidus came to accomplish. What did Chassidus come to contribute? And in different Maimorim, you have different Inyanim. You could say Chassidus came to teach us how to have Ava V'yira. L'dofka Beis Baruch. Chassidus teaches us Chochmas Elokus, understanding godliness. Dasa L'kei Avicha. But in Ayin Beis, it becomes very clear, something that is there in the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, and all the Rabbeim, that it comes to teach us one word, Memutza. The Memutza, the interface, I'll use the word interface, between Elokus and existence, between Elokus and Welt. And the word in Chassidus for interface, the ultimate word for interface is not just Memutza, it's Keser. So everything you've ever learned about Keser, which always remains somewhat elusive. We know Keser is Atik and Arich, Keser is Tainug and Rotzen. But even Tainug and Rotzen, explain Tainug and Rotzen. Pleasure and will is what you always hear. So what does it mean, pleasure? When you eat a meal, you have pleasure. That's Tainug of Keser? Probably not, right? So what pleasure is it exactly? Pleasure when you learn Teda? What does pleasure meaning? I want to just point out that a lot of words we use, if you start digging deeper, what does it mean? What means pleasure? God's pleasure. Okay. So God has pleasure and God has will, desire, Keser, crown. What does all this mean? So you'll see throughout Hemshech Ayin Beis, right from the beginning, he goes right for it. He goes immediately to discuss what is Keser. That's how the whole Hemshech begins. And this will be a recurrent theme throughout the Hemshech. Keser keeps coming up again and again and again. Because Keser is in Kabbalah, when the Arizal comes to deal with it is on the Mukabolim before that is. Keser is a big discussion. Any of you learn Vayelech Samach Vov. So there's a whole machlekes there between the Ramak and the Rameh about Keser. Ima Keser hu Ein Sof. Is it Ein Sof or not Ein Sof? What difference does it make? Because the question is, if Keser is Ein Sof, so then how does it connect to the world, which is Gvul? and Kesser is not Ein Sof, how does it connect to the Eibishter who is Ein Sof? So we have a dilemma here. Gvul and Bli Gvul don't meet. As many Gvulim if you have, it'll never become Bli Gvul. Trillion. Bli Gvul is a different echos, a different status than Gvul. So how do these two meet? How does the Beta meet a Nivra? They're antithetical and diametric opposites in every possible way. There's nothing in common between the Beta and the Nivra, except that which the Eibishter implants. So the Mekubalim were debating, where do they meet? Where can we meet Elokus? So there are different opinions. Usually, two people meet, let's say, in Elam Hazi, you have Ish v'Isha, but they're both humans. So they may be different. They may be very different, but they're still both human beings. Two friends, two Chavedim, a Rav and a Talmud. One may be has more knowledge than the other, but they're still Be'erach Zelazah. Av and Ben. Wherever you go, relationship means something is synonymous. You don't have a relationship, you don't have a relationship with the stone. Even though the stone is a Nivra and you're a Nivra. Why? There's nothing in common. The Kolshken v'Kal v'Chemer, Elikus and Welt. So the Mekubalim, in understanding based on the Psukim and based on Teresh Peh, Kesed is the answer to them. That Kesed is a place where the two meet. But the problem is, in Kesed itself, if Kesed is Ein Sof, then it doesn't meet the Welt. And if it's not Ein Sof, it doesn't meet Elikus. So how do you have both together? How can both be together? How can they both join without annihilating one or the other? So there are Mekubalim that say that the kavanah is that we should become bottle and lose your tzir of gvul and absorb Ein Sof. So basically it's about bittul b'mitzvah yesh and bittul b'mitzias, and that way you can connect to the Eibishter. We know Ili Yadaita v'Yisav, the Alter Eibishter told Moshe Rabbeinu, Lo yireinu odom v'chai, nobody can see me and live. In other words, you can't have both. If you want Elikus, you have to let go of yourself. If you want yourself, you can't have all of Elikus. So there are Mukabolim that say that's the Ktachlis, that you have to eliminate yourself, your ego, your personality, your identity. Other Mukabolim go the other way, that we'll never really reach Elikus. Elikus is Loyerani Adam V'chai. We can't touch real Bli Gvul. The Eibishter gave us a reflection of Elikus that we can reach there. So we really don't reach Atzmos. We reach levels that are higher than us, but Elikus b'tzimtzum, so to speak. Behela. So these are two. Chassidus, however, rejects both and says no. Chassidus wants to have the best of both worlds, that mamish atzmus and mamish nivra without us losing our tzir. But then you have the dilemma. I would say, in a nutshell, Ayin Beis comes, as all of Chassidus comes, to answer this dilemma. And that's why it's thousands, so many pages. Because it's not, you can't just answer it with one answer. You have to create a whole stepping stones of an interface that connects the nivra to the beta, because they're so opposites. As I mentioned last week, if the Eibishter just said, be an Eved Elikim, which means just serve me, you don't need to understand me, you don't need to feel me, no Avos Hashem, no Yedias Hashem. Okay, that's easy. Maisa B'Peil, or Maisa Kof. You just do what God wants you to do, and that's it. But that's not what the Eibishter wants. He wants a relationship. So how do you have the relationship? So there you have all of Chassidus. And Ayin Beis, in a way, distills it into one big structure of what are the stepping stones, how Yesh Chumri, like you and I, with all our grubkeit and all our hagbolas and all the things that define a nivra, how could it in any way have a relationship with something that is so sublime and so edel and so ruchni, and even beyond that to the highest levels, all the way to the highest levels, mamish and atzmus itself. This is, without Chassidus, you have no answer to this question. With Chassidus, you still need to explain it. And Ayin Beis, if I were to sum up, that's what Ayin Beis comes to accomplish. As a reflection of all of Chassidus. Once you see it in Ayin Beis, I guarantee you, any mimer you have ever learned, whether a piece of Tanya, or Derech B'Shosech, or a mimer from any of the Rabbeim, or a Rabbi Rashab himself, you'll suddenly see how it's one little piece of this puzzle. But the puzzle is this connection, the Achdus Habeira with Welt. And though we're not going to learn actually mamish inside right now, but we'll do that next Thursday. But from the beginning, with this Agdama, you'll see right away how the Rebbe Rashab goes right into it. You'll see after he starts B'Shor Sheikdimu, talks about Kosher Lehem Shnei Ksarim. Then explains what Kesed is, 3 Pirushim in Kesed. And then he explains what Kesed is, and he says Kesed is exactly what I just said, a Momutze. it's a rotzen because there's no connection between something with another thing unless there's a rotzen. If I don't have a desire to sit here and give this shiur, there's no connection between us. Kavyocha by the Eibishter, if he didn't have a rotzen for Welt, then there's no connection. So rotzen becomes the first, they'll call it like, if you wish, what's the word I want to use? I don't call landing page, but it's the first spot, so to speak, where Elokus begins to relate to something that is not Elokus in its pure form, is Nivroim Tachtein. So we'll stop here. This was the Akdama, but I think this Akdama we covered. So what we'll do next week is I'm going to actually start learning it. Now, if you guys learn it, well, you should learn it. You can learn, I don't know what pace you go, but if you go whatever pace you go, you let me know. So I'll more or less try to cover whatever you learned that week. And as I said, both with more amic and more connection to the whole picture. Okay, good. Everyone have a good...